So for those of you who are committed to the metrics embedded in Capitalism 1.0, and there might be some of you here, you know, GDP, earnings, quarterly reports, revenue, profits. For a moment, let's consider the possibility that while these metrics may have served us well in the past, they're no longer working for us today. The world has changed. Environmental and social impacts, along with wealth and income concentration, which leads to a rapidly shrinking middle class, can no longer be ignored, and our planet is becoming unstable, both environmentally and socially, and global conflict is becoming ever more likely. So for a moment, imagine if there was a metric that allowed companies to measure their influence on well-being throughout their entire value chain. So if you're an organization that lends money to another organization, and that company does some really bad things with the money that was lent to them, trace it back to who's lending the money and say, well, you shouldn't lend money to companies that are destroying the planet and displacing Aboriginal cultures, and they can't fish because their little river's polluted. You would be able to trace back where the harm is done. And imagine a world where companies established a competitive advantage in the marketplace by creating more overall well-being and inclusive prosperity than their competitors. Well, that's the marketplace. It's not solely on price, but it's well-being. It's how much positive you put into the world, and that's how you become a company of choice in the marketplace. There's a little bit of that happening. Patagonia is a great example, but not enough. Imagine the upward spiral of positive innovation and outcomes that such a well-being metric would create. You're now competing in a marketplace where you want to outcompete your competitor. How can I create more well-being? How can I create more well-being? We're creating poverty because we're paying our workers too little, and they can afford to live and eat. Yes, we need to do something about that and create more well-being. I mean, it's a complete mind shift. But imagine, and that's what we're here to do. We're trying to think about what could be. And there's smart people out there working on this. But I'm not the smartest guy in the room on this topic. So please help me welcome our guest speaker, Mark Anielski.
Let me switch over to. That'll work. Now if I just. Thank you. Get the this version. Or you can switch it over. So thank you, Brad, for having me. I'm from Edmonton, and thank you, Irene, my friend, who hosted me at her home. And for me, I spend my life talking about happiness and well-being. I wrote the book, The Economics of Happiness, in 2007 as a proposed roadmap for finding a new path for our economy, an economy which unfortunately is addicted to not just growth, but has a big challenge ahead of us, which is the problem of debt-based money, which has I believe, an increasingly short shelf life. I'm not going to critique capitalism. I was actually fascinated by reading on Wikipedia who coined the word capitalism anyways. Anyone? I think it was Marx who coined the word capitalism. So it's interesting the guy that founded communism coined the word capitalism, so maybe we don't really have a definition of capitalism. Maybe capitalism has a new opportunity, and I would argue that this opportunity is what I call genuine wealth. To leverage the total genuine wealth of communities means to govern our communities and our corporations based on the well-being bottom line. Sorry for this, but these photos I've taken, that's how I take inventory, is to take pictures of the ideas, because pictures are rich, full of 1,000 words. So when I wrote my book, it was inspired by my students. I'm a forester, I'm an accountant, I have an accounting background, and an economist. I'm totally confused. But it was actually my forestry background that led me to see that our economy is a little bit out of sync with how nature functions. Nature thinks in circles and closed loop systems and is dynamic. And Brad raised the issue of Buckminster Fuller, who said, you know, a change in the system can't happen unless we create or make the old system obsolete. So the question we have to ponder today is, what is the economy for anyways? Well, I would argue that all of us need a CHO. I think Irene is the chief happiness officer of her household, and I'm certainly the chief happiness officer of our little company, Genuine Wealth. I think every community, every government, every corporation needs a chief happiness officer. But actually, I'm a consultant. As I told my daughter when she was 5, I'm a money hunter. I sell ideas. When I was with the Inuit in Nunavut, she said, "What do you do, Dad?" I said, "I sell ideas." And she said, "Don't they have their own?" So, right, out of the mouth of babes. So all of us in this room, we're all smart. We have all kinds of ideas. We know how to solve some of the challenges. And I only have 30 minutes of your time, but I'm going to share with you some of my ideas that I think have come from studying specific to the language we use, because words are powerful. So when we say the word economy, if we don't understand that it comes from the Greek, oikos, household, nomia, management. When we say the word competition, it comes from the Latin competere, which means to strive together. So I would tell my U of A business students, I taught corporate social responsibility for 10 years until last year I quit. Said, I think there's a new frontier. When we say mortgage, it means a death pledge in French. And we feel so happy when we have a pre-approved mortgage. And in Quebec, they don't use the word anymore. So, the power of words. You know, Ray Anderson was one of my heroes, a mentor in terms of a champion of a new capitalism. And I asked him to endorse my book before he died. Well, that was a few years before he died. And his secretary said, "Ray's a busy guy, he'll only read one chapter." "Which chapter, Mark?" I said, "The business chapter." And he endorsed it. So the question is, what is this notion of happiness? What makes us happy? The Dalai Lama said the purposes of our lives is to achieve happiness. Aristotle said the purpose of life is happiness. But what is happiness? Well, my search for happiness started last year. It actually started a long time ago. But this is my trip last year to Tahiti, where I was invited by the Senator of France, Senator Richard Touavea, to address a youth conference on reimagining French Polynesia. And I have some good news. In September, I'm going back to start the first Genuine Wealth Economie de Bonheur in French Polynesia. And you know what? We're going to infect Paris with it too, because Sarkozy didn't finish the job. And Bhutan is leading, but the French could be infected by this notion of joie de vivre and true happiness. So why not start in paradise, in Tahiti? They got their own problems, believe me. They have nuclear testing, they're completely dependent on France for transfer payments. But when you get greeted like this at the airport, even after a 5-hour flight, this is President Oscar Temaru and the young 39-year-old Senator Richard Touavea. Happiness, though, means in Greek, well-being of spirit. So when I ask someone in the streets of Toronto, "Are you happy? What brings you happiness?" I'm thinking about that deeper, nuanced aspect of the well-being of our soul, of our spirit. Aristotle said happiness comes from a sense of well-being resulting from achieving excellence in the fulfillment of one's functions. I believe we're in the midst of an asset devolution. My argument tonight is that where capitalism perhaps has an opportunity is to understand that, yes, we're doing some wonderful things and indicators, but we're failing to leverage the very assets which have been given to us, some would say by the Creator, to be good stewards of. That's what economics is about, good stewardship. So what does it mean to take an asset-based approach to managing our economy? Some of these slides, I don't know if Bob's here, Bob Willard. But Bob has also reminded us that we've gone from a post-World War economy where 80% of the assets in the economy were tangible assets, things like buildings and natural resources, to today's reality of Google and Facebook, and which I argue Facebook hasn't really been properly evaluated, was it? Was its IPO properly evaluated? Who verified the asset value? And then it goes into the casino and gets traded every day. I learned this last, when we invest in the stock market, we're not actually infusing any new money. But our economy's now moved to 80% intangible assets. That includes trust and relationships and goodwill, patents, ideas. And yet accounting profession hasn't caught up to this reality. I believe in this new idea of what we call the 5 capitals of genuine wealth. And the 5 capitals idea was probably presented back in 1999, I think, by a group called Sigma in the UK. Actually, you may know. So again, there's nothing new under the sun here. But to formalize this idea that there's at least 5 forms of capital that constitute the wealth of the nation, and that those capital assets are partly the co-responsibility of communities and corporations to be good stewards of. I'm going to rip through this very quickly. My partners, so we formed a 4-partners cooperative. Actually, before Genuine Wealth, we had Happiness Inc., like Monster Inc. And Alberta Registry said, you can't have Happiness Inc. You have to have an action verb in there. I was like, oh, are you kidding me? Okay, Happiness Solutions Inc. So I'd go around saying, we do happiness audits. We do happiness makeovers. Right? Everyone wants to be happy. So there's got to be business in this. And I had like 10 people just pile into my kitchen. And it was too many people. Half of us want to drink coffee, half of us want to go climb Mount Everest. So we regrouped, and 4 of us then created a 4-partnership cooperative business called Genuine Wealth. And our youngest partner, Dominique Michaud, 28-year-old deputy mayor of Leduc, now lives in Toronto, heading up the Gates Foundation Global Poverty Project. So maybe we can get some money out of the Gates Foundation to doing this stuff. But like the B Corp, we believe that we need to measure what matters for well-being. And I use the capital B slanting forward because that's the future. Our mission is to enable the building of flourishing communities of well-being by applying the principles of genuine wealth. The book, in part, was motivated by my students at the Bainbridge Graduate Institute, the first MBA program in sustainable business in the Seattle area in 2003. I was a founding faculty member. And he said, Mark, you got to write this book. We're terrified of economics. I said, economics isn't terrifying. If economists spoke plain language, instead of fertile obfuscation, then maybe we would understand that we're all economists. And we have to go back to the origins of the words. Bobby Kennedy was my great inspiration. 2 weeks ago, I stood on the stage about 50 miles from Lawrence, Kansas, where he gave this famous speech in 1968, a few months before he was killed. And he said, what's wrong with the way we measure progress, the gross national product? He said, measures napalm and destruction of the redwoods, and yet fails to measure the joy of our children's play. In short, he said, it measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. So isn't it amazing, over 40 years later, we still don't have a new accounting system. We still have this income statement called GDP. We still run the province of Ontario without a balance sheet. Do you know that? There is no balance sheet for Ontario. You can't run Coca-Cola. Warren Buffett would throw Coca-Cola in the trash if you didn't have a balance sheet. And yet that's how we run our governments. It's outrageous. And so Kennedy's lament has still not been addressed. Simon Kuznets, the architect, one of the early architects with Keynes, who came up with the system of national accounts. GDP its birth was in World War II Britain, and the Brits needed a way of paying for the war, so they had to find a way of tracking cash flow. That's why it came to be. Now every nation in the world uses it. But Kuznets said the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income as defined by GDP. Goals and calls for more growth must define of what and for what. And for whom? Joseph Stiglitz, some economists are actually getting on board. I was at the UN with him, with the Bhutanese Prime Minister last year. And he says, GDP has failed to capture the factors that make a difference in people's lives, including happiness, security, leisure. So we need a new accounting system at all levels. This is a piece of work I did in 1999, the US Genuine Progress Indicator, which compares a blue line, the GDP line, with environmental degradation, those negative territory lines, and the red line bars, which are the adjusted GDP when we actually account for social and environmental costs. So we actually take seriously that there's depreciation of these other assets. We get a different picture of progress. And it's not very popular. I remember advising Paul Martin. He says, "Are you kidding me? I'm not going to give this to Chrétien. People like upward sloping curves, right?" There's a bigger problem. The biggest risk to well-being and happiness, I believe, is the unsustainable levels of debt. The United States currently is spending, and the numbers are fabricating, I tell you, is the largest expenditure in the national budget this year will be interest payments on the national debt, exceeding the military budget. The total U.S. debt in the United States is $60 trillion and counting. And the problem with the system is the power of compound interest means that the debt can never be repaid. The average American is spending about 36 cents on every dollar today on payments of interest embedded in every Starbucks coffee, every meal, every mortgage. That is wasted life energy. Same is true of every other country in this world. Unless we solve this debt money system and come up with creative solutions, we're never going to get to sustainability. That's the tough love story, and Jordy knows that story. But that's what I love doing, kind of analyzing the reality. And I could tell you, there's different solutions to this issue. Solutions that Abraham Lincoln proposed, that the Chinese actually adopted when Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Qing dynasty. China is probably the only country that actually has a sovereign money system. Thomas Jefferson said and wrote, that every American is entitled, endowed by the Creator with the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He didn't say happiness was guaranteed. He said that it was going to be a pursuit. But the evidence suggests that despite rising levels of income in America, there are fewer happy people than there were in 1950. When we plot happiness, self-rated happiness, and GDP per capita, Alberta is way out. They're in the frontier with Luxembourg. I was talking to my Luxembourg banker friend yesterday. So I said, "Alex, you're awake. You're in state. Keep your day job. You're still working for you're a currency trader. Keep your day job because we're going to solve this. We're going to go to Switzerland. We're going to solve this issue." Because the truth is, one could say that happiness and well-being could be optimized at $10,000 to $20,000 per capita. Alberta's way out there at 60,000 plus. And there's little Bhutan and Costa Rica, which is the happiest country in the world, is doing much better per dollar of GDP. Okay, this is Bernanke. You have to say that there's actually a central banker that says at a commencement speech in South Carolina that your parents were right, money doesn't buy you happiness. So are we in a crisis or opportunity? These are the symbols in the Chinese for what is crisis? I think it's opportunity, or an imminent opportunity. So again, the words economy, household management, competition to strive together. Venice was the origins of, I would call, capitalism. In the sense, Venice and Florence, the Medicis. Medici saw opportunity where no one else saw opportunity. At a time when the Italian states were feuding, they came back and they dominated Italy, and they financed the Renaissance. Why? Because they saw assets, they saw the value of assets where others didn't see it. And it was in Venice that double entry bookkeeping was born, with Leonardo da Vinci and Luca Pacioli 500 years ago. The word value means to be worthy or strong, and virtue is the moral excellence of a person. I had some fun in Alberta too, comparing Alberta's GDP from 1960, which is the green line, and the adjusted genuine progress indicator. I wasn't very popular. In fact, I was so popular with Ralph Klein at the time that it was broadcast. It made the CBC, the national news, but it was blacked out in Alberta because of Oilers hockey. But my friends in CBC here said, "What did you do?" I said, "I've never seen Ralph Klein speechless," because I'd worked on these indicators in the Alberta Treasury when I worked there. But we were basically saying, look, the 50 indicators of well-being that actually matter to people have been lagging the GDP. For the city of Edmonton, similar project, showing Edmonton's GDP. Chief economist hired me to have a basis of forecasting future well-being and tying that to the budget, capital and operating budgets. How are we doing for time? I'm ripping through these slides because I have to get, it's a shock and awe lecture, right? I was just called on Friday, I was invited to Harvard. I'm going to speak at the Harvard Wellness Club on Saturday. So that's kind of cool. So here are the dudes. Here's Leonardo da Vinci, and here's Luca Pacioli with his Florentian benefactor, Duke. Now, Luca said something really important. Accountants, I didn't learn this in accounting theory, believe me, at the U of A. There was no such thing as profit in the Guild Society of Venice. Guilds were like cooperatives. If there was anything left over, it was called a residual. After payment was made to the members of the cooperative, who were always tied to a household, Lucas said the most important thing accountants do is take inventory. When you do an audit, you go and physically count the Hondas in the parking lot of the Honda dealership. I know that, I did that. And then you worry about the market valuation and balancing the books. The notion of the balance sheet was the most important thing. You know, of assets equals equity plus equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Imagine if we had a balance sheet for Ontario, what would it look like? I don't even know. Do you know we used to write, we still to this day write infrastructure like a hospital off at $1 on the books. So when Ralph Klein privatized hospitals, he just wrote them off at, they were anything the market is willing to pay for them. Well, Luca would have been wringing his hands saying that's just terrible accounting. So think about these guys. 500 years ago, they gave us the double entry bookkeeping system that we still use today. And I would argue that accountants are so focused on tax and audit that they've forgotten the great art of management accounting. Management accounting is, does your company deliver, I would argue, well-being to its employees and to its, not shareholders, careholders, as Rick Kahn from MEC, the CFO, told me one day. Let's change it from shareholder to careholder. But I love Warren Buffett, and I would think, Warren, what would you say to my ideas, right? I presented this through my friend Toby Heaps to George Soros at the Davos meeting in 2011. And I said, Toby, what did George say? George said, I don't think the world is yet ready for holistic wealth. But Karl Koch-Weser, the vice chairman of Deutsche Bank, said, I'm intrigued enough, can you show me a roadmap to what you're arguing? And I said to George in a 2-page briefing, it's time to orient our economy to this wealth maximization, because the word wealth actually comes from the Old English. It means the conditions of well-being. That's what it actually means. So when I say well-being, I am standing on solid etymological grounds. Now, anyone who studied Warren Buffett knows Warren loves good balance sheets. Well, you've looked at Ontario, you're like, what? There's no balance sheet. How am I going to evaluate the highest and best use value of the assets that are Ontario? But I could tell you Warren owns Coca-Cola. I could tell you their brand is worth 25% of their balance sheet. Who evaluated their brand? So I'm trying to think like Warren. Would he be supporting the argument tonight? And I think he would. So the idea of genuine wealth, those two words are powerful because this is our daughter, Stephanie, a few years ago. She's 14 now. So the word genuine means to live according to our values. So when we ask ourselves, why do you love living in Toronto? Why do you like living in St. John's, Newfoundland? Albertans never ask that question. So if we're going to measure what matters, we better measure what matters to why we choose to live somewhere, what gives us joy in our lives. Because what we're measuring now, most of us don't know. I could ask all of you in the audience tonight, who knows what's going on in their stock portfolios, in their RSPs? Do you have a relationship with those companies? So we need to be authentic in our actions. And the word wealth, again, means the conditions of well-being. When I learned that, I knew that everything had changed. I've been studying natural capital. That's where I get most of my work, is valuing nature. But if I think about total assets, total wealth, I'm thinking about social capital, relationships, and human capital, and build capital and financial. John Ruskin, the philosopher, said, there's no wealth but life including all its powers of love, of joy, and of admiration. Now, I believe the 5 capitals aren't just isolated. I don't actually like the triple bottom line. I say everything's integrated. like the forest. So imagine a tree with different branches, where the 5 capitals are the 5 main branches, and within those capital or asset classes are many sub-asset classes. The tree is rooted in virtue, and the values are the veins that support the life of the tree. The human capital is the skills, the aspirations, the dreams. So making tea with the Inuit when I was up there. I could tell you they understand this notion because they know they need a diversity of skills, because when the power plant goes out, someone has to be able to build an igloo. And when the polar bear comes to town, someone has to be able to kill one. So they understand that resilience in practice means having the maximum amount of well-being and genuine wealth. Our social capital and the networks, the relationships, the trust being the most precious of all assets, which can degrade in a moment. But how do we measure trust? How do we measure belonging? Our natural capital, all the environmental stocks and ecological goods and services that have no value in the market system, yet you know that a wetland cleans water. So how are we going to book the value? I just finished a big project for Ducks Unlimited. They asked me, can you make a business case for us that we could take to Flaherty and Prime Minister Harper? That the conservation of wetlands is in the best interests of Canadians. I said, yep, we can do that. In fact, we can show you the return on taxes paid by the people who work in conserving wetlands. And the payback period, guys, is 6-7 months. You just do the math. And then guess what, Ducks Unlimited? You didn't book the asset, did you? It's just a cash flow. You're getting donations, you're conserving wetlands. Where's the asset? Nature Conservancy, where's the asset? It should be on the balance sheet, at least for management purposes, at least notes of the financials. Now Ducks Unlimited or Nature Conservancy can do a deal with Tech, and Tech buys conservation assets. They have a bookkeeping entry, and the province of British Columbia has a bookkeeping entry. So all these accounting entries are going to be reconciled. Our bill capital, I just told you, like things like hospitals that were written off at $1, no depreciation schedule. So it's time to up the ante. And then financial capital, the most wonderful and fictitious of all capitals, because money is created out of thin air. That's why we use the Latin fiat lux, to be created out of thin air. Money has no relationship with real wealth. I could go on for hours about that, but trust me or watch YouTube videos on this. My 20-year-old students know this, but our age we didn't learn this in university. So what is our genuine wealth? Well, it's, again, those 5 capital assets that are held, hopefully in harmony with each other. There's different applications of this idea for a corporation that we're working with companies, with communities. Most of my work with communities, I've advised the government of China. Now, China is interesting because it has a national policy called Xiaokang. Xiaokang means, it's a Confucian word, which means well-being. Since 1991, when Deng Xiaoping was the president of China, he adopted Xiaokang as the economic strategy for China. At the time, it meant $4,000 per capita GDP. Now they're around $8,000. So China is an interesting place to watch. No other country in the West has a well-being economic policy. What about Bhutan? What can we learn from Bhutan, this tiny mythical Buddhist kingdom squashed between China and India, with a Buddhist king who says, instead of gross national product, let's have gross national happiness. And so I've been advising them as well that they're doing some important work, but they're tiny. They're 700,000 people. So they're trying to measure things like well-being in terms of education, health, time use, good governance, community vitality. Now, philosophers have talked about what constitutes a good life and happiness. And Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, building on Aristotle, said there's 2 things that are necessary. And I hope you think about this seriously. The first aspect of well-being is sufficiency of material needs. So having a living wage, having a sufficiency of shelter, good food, hopefully good friends. And the second, he said, was virtuous action. I argue that what's gone missing in our culture is any reflection on virtue. And Thomas Jefferson was clear, without virtue, happiness cannot be. I can ask you now, who remembers the 4 virtues that Plato defined for Western civilization? Anyone? Name one.
Patience is a virtue.
Patience? Did you say?
They told me many, many times that patience is a virtue.
Yeah, patience is a holy virtue. But we're talking about practical virtues. They were courage. They were temperance or moderation. They were wisdom, and they were justice. And the fact that we don't remember them, the fact that they're never discussed in the parliament or a country, means that Jefferson is right, I think. Without virtue, happiness cannot be. So Bhutan has this wonderful new proposing to the world, let us adopt a new economic paradigm based on well-being and happiness. It's a compelling vision. It's something I'm trying with others, and all of us are trying to move forward at different levels. Imagine if Prime Minister Harper said, my role is to create conditions that will help our people find happiness. Woohoo, I'd vote. How about Rob Ford, you know? We'll take Rob. We'll do some remediation on him. No, but in all seriousness, like, you know, a Buddhist kingdom which says personal spiritual fulfillment is not just a spiritual pursuit, it's government policy. Okay, the Bhutanese have some other problems. They expel Tibetans or Nepalese that are refugees in Edmonton. So they're not perfect either. So the Dalai Lama says, he's building on the Buddha, which says the purpose of life is to achieve happiness. He says we need a new economic system that enables the pursuit of true happiness. The economic development itself needs to be oriented towards this goal. Well, the good news is, I don't know if it's good news, this is what happens in life. Your happiness is highest up till puberty, and then it falls into the trough. And then at 45, you bottom out. That's probably because your mortgage is paid, your kids are growing up. I'm sorry for the younger crowd, the X whatever generations they were dealing with. And then you crawl out of the trough, and at 75, you're right into the sunset. I know we're running out of time. There is a science of happiness here that all of this is grounded in. That the science, these are positive psychologists who've been studying this stuff, say that there's three aspects. One is your genetics and your upbringing as a child. The next is your relationships, and the last one, the smallest portion, is income and education. Only 10% is money and education. So the 40% can be the one that we can affect the most, the relationships we build with each other. I'm going to cut to the good stuff. I could talk about the happiest communities in the country. Who's optimizing happiness per $10,000 is Sherbrooke and Toronto and Edmonton are down at the bottom. There's Ray Anderson talking about we're only halfway up Mount Sustainability. Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia says there's no such thing as sustainability. It's just a kind of path we get on. We try each day to make it better. See, Brad was right. I could talk for hours, but I won't.
I'll give you 5 more minutes.
Okay, so the model, here's the model that I believe. It's based on the idea that Maslow was right, that there's a hierarchy of needs and that the well-being accounting system we develop is going to be based on the aspects of, first of all, the environment bounds everything. Without clean water and air, we would be all dead. So let's be clear about that. Then we have material and financial well-being that is foundational to even the pursuit of happiness. Then we have physical, mental health. Then we have relationships in the middle, and then at the heart of it, and then we have happiness or self-actualization. I could tell you, I can measure at every level. We've measured this in the town of Olds, Alberta, just this last year. We asked people to self-evaluate these aspects of their life. You can tie all that to objective measures of well-being from StatsCan data. You can ask the same questions in companies. So the model applies at every level. You know, there's good things going on like the B team. I love the B Corp. And the B team is Richard Branson talking about they got well-being in the middle of their plan B. And we got great things like Bob Willard's doing. I wanted to close with reflections on this company. We're working with a company called Urban Systems or Consulting Engineers out of Western Canada. They have an amazing, I've never heard a company that has a higher calling. not just a vision, higher calling, which is spirit in service for vibrant communities. They asked us to come in to evaluate how well they're doing. We talked, you know what, we've just finished a client audit. So we've asked the clients to evaluate how they are serving, how they're being served by urban systems. These are engineers, right? We're economists. So we're backcasting the values that clients are expressing about the relationship they treasure with urban systems, and then use those as measures of progress. We're going to embed that in their management accounting protocols. Right now, all they care about is timesheets. We want to expand that to measure well-being. So the two founders, the current CEO and president. So we're trying to measure the workplace well-being for urban systems. The other thing I'm going to just close on is Gallup. Everyone knows what Gallup is. Well, Gallup's been measuring the happiness or well-being in the United States. Every day they're polling 1,000 Americans. You can imagine where the happiest state is, right? Any guess?
California.
Nope. Hawaii, exactly. Well, who's the saddest state?
New York.
Louisiana. Yeah. Mississippi. And you kind of know why, right? Great inequality, there's poverty, there's all that stuff. So, but Gallup, these guys have said that work on this stuff have come up with the 5 essential elements of well-being in the workplace. They include career well-being. So the question is how you occupy your time and liking what you do each day. Social well-being, having strong relationships and love in your life. Financial well-being, effectively managing your economic life to reduce stress and increase security. Physical well-being, having good health and enough energy to get things on a daily basis. And community well-being, the sense of engagement and involvement you have with the area where you live. So they're saying if those are the 5 kind of measurable aspects of well-being, why aren't we measuring those? They did a survey of about 2,000 American workers. I can tell you on average, about only 8 to 10% of Americans are saying these things are true, American workers. That is pathetic. That means we can do a lot more to increase and invest in the well-being, certainly of workers. And we got great companies like Zappos, you know. We have cooperative economies. I think the final frontier will be when we have the financial system. We have banks and investment companies thinking about what I call well-being return on investment. We got social return on investment coming up, but what about well-being return on investment? By actually measuring the returns on every asset that we're managing, and be creative enough and bold enough to say we can measure these assets, because there's a test in accounting. The test is, what's the highest and best use of an asset? What's the highest and best use of your skills, your potential, your dreams? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Because financial returns are only one. I'm not throwing those out. I'm just saying, let's expand the envelope. Let's get management accountants back in the game, and let's help Warren Buffett make better investments and still drink Coke and play bridge with Bill Gates. Thank you.